How's it going, Metroid fans? I hope you all are doing well, and yeah, I think we're all still processing our thoughts and our feelings about Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. I know I am, but I finally got to a point where I think I have really my foothold on how I feel on each aspect of this game. Obviously, I already gave my review, I gave my spoiler review, but I still have quite a lot of thoughts about this game, and I really just want to share them genuinely with you guys. Like I said in my past video, I am a longtime Metroid fan, but I gotta be real with you guys. Metroid Dread was the first new Metroid release that we got while my channel was active. So that was kind of like the first Metroid game where you guys felt like you were a part of my experience, my personal experience. And now Metroid Prime 4 Beyond would be the second Metroid game. So throughout the vast history of me enjoying Metroid games, it has been a very personal thing. I have enjoyed these games quietly, in the peace of my own room, feeling like I'm completely alone with Samus on whatever planet we're on that given adventure. So for me, it's not usually a communal thing. I never really cared about the fact that people didn't like Metroid Prime 3. I did. And I didn't really pay attention to what people outside of me thought, because I didn't have friends who played Metroid. It's always just been my thing. And honestly, I'm seeing a lot of people on the internet get pretty divisive and frankly tribalistic about this. The internet really tends to lack nuance, and Metroid is no exception. People either act like it's all completely terrible or the entire game is completely amazing. And are some people being genuine about it? Maybe. But I also think I think you're getting a lot of disingenuous people who have their own specific agendas or biases. Because, for example, I think some people are taking advantage of the fact that it's a rage-baiting topic. And, they're trying to get clicks, they're trying to draw attention, so they're acting like the game is worse than it actually is. But I think sometimes you get disingenuous people on the opposite side of things, where they just don't want to risk upsetting their Metroid audience, so they're just shilling for absolutely everything about this game, acting like it's just as good as the games from the previous trilogy. I do not think that's the case, but again, I don't think it's all bad either. And so, for me, I feel like it's a much more complex and layered topic. Not everything about this game is good or bad, it just depends on what we're talking about. To me, the quality of this game varies drastically depending on the aspect. If you ask me about the music, I think it is it's one of the best games in the entire Prime series. Let's just put it that way. The music is wonderful. It is exciting. I had the beats just like in my head. It was all catchy in my head for a while. And now I've mixed it in, as my background music when I'm editing or when I'm script writing. I really love the music of Metroid Prime 4. The story, I think it's utter garbage. I think it's absolutely terrible, and I am going to be talking about that and explaining why in this video. The level design, I think it's really lacking. I really think the level design is really lacking. I'll talk about that later. But the gameplay, God, the gameplay made me happy because it felt like Metroid Prime, but just smoother and a little bit quicker. And I was so happy about the fact that they didn't try to do too much to this game to try to modernize it. They didn't try to make it like Call of Duty or Halo. It's still like the way you scan things, the way you look around, the speed in which Samus is moving, it still felt like Metroid Prime. And that made me insanely happy. That's what I wanted from this game. The graphics, my goodness, the graphics are absolutely gorgeous on this game. Just look amazing. Some of the atmospheres, other than the desert, but I mean, Soul Valley, it just kind of is what it is. It's a really barren desert, and I will talk about a little bit of that as well. But as far as the specific biomes, the specific areas that you go to, whether it be Ice Belt or, at certain parts of Flare Pool, definitely Volt Forge. So the graphics and the atmosphere, wonderful. So as you can see, it just depends on what the topic is. And so if you ask me how I felt on the game, well, which part? And then we'll unpack that. But I will say, as far as what I was hoping for this game, it absolutely did not meet my expectations. And here's why. The game is called Metroid Prime 4. Because it's called Metroid Prime 4, I'm going to have certain expectations. Now, I mean this genuinely. If they had just called this game Metroid Beyond and removed the Prime title, then I probably would have been more receptive to the changes to this series, and I probably would have been generally less critical of this game. But no, they gave it the title of Prime because they wanted to benefit off of that branding, which means naturally from its fans, it's going to get Prime expectations in terms of the story, in terms of the lore, in terms of the level design, in terms of the atmosphere, and in terms of the tone. There is nothing wrong with having high standards if it's going to carry that mantle of a title. And I will say this, you get a lot of people that are saying that the criticisms of the NPC characters are very, very overblown. And, it depends on your perspective, but I'd say it this way. When people make that statement and say that people like me are blowing the NPC thing out of the water, are making it seem like it's a much bigger deal than it needs to be, my question would be, have you played all of the three first Metroid Prime games? Because what that does is if you play those first three games, especially 1 and 2, it sets an expectation of what the experience is going to be like. Now, if you've never really played a Metroid Prime game and you're not really familiar with the feelings of isolation and the puzzle solving and the loneliness that comes with being with Samus in a 3D world on a distant planet somewhere in space, then you're probably not going to be as annoyed with the NPCs because there's a lot of interactions like that, in like first-person shooter games. But this is a different, category than that. Nintendo has labeled Metroid Prime games as a first-person adventure game, and the Prime experience, like I would say a quintessential aspect of the Prime experience, is getting that isolation, that lonely feeling, having everything feel eerie. Now, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, which is a game I do love, did experiment with some of those interactions with the Galactic Federation troopers, with the other bounty hunters, and generally speaking, I did really, really like that game. If you look at my list of my highest ranked Metroid games of all time, I tend to think more highly of Metroid Prime 3 Corruption than most people do. But with that being said, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption definitely hit my limit of how much interaction and how much noise and all that I'm willing to tolerate in my Metroid Prime experience. I feel like any more than that, and it starts to become a distraction. I start to miss that feeling of Prime 1 and Prime 2, where I don't feel like I'm on an alien, distant planet. And then you add on the fact that they're, corny and quippy and trying to be humorous, which wasn't in the first or second game basically at all. I think the only humorous moment you got in the entirety of the first Metroid Prime game is a rock hitting Samus's helmet after she defeats Stardust. I genuinely think that's all there is to it. And another aspect that I want to talk about is the beginning parts of the game. So I think it's really interesting when Samus is transported, and one of the issues I had with it is, she's transported to Vyros because of the artifact, which, warped her through space and time, whatever. My question is, why did it just take Samus, Sylux, the Metroids, some of the Federation tech, and some of the troopers? Yet it conveniently left out all of the space pirates, which was really, really odd to me. I understand, if you didn't want the space pirates to be a part of the story, but they were invading. There were space pirates all over that Galactic Federation outpost. So theoretically, some of them should have went to Vyros as well, right? It didn't make any sense whatsoever that they weren't there. And for me, I think their absence was definitely missed. I would have liked to have seen them there, would have given us more things to scan, more interesting lore to dissect. I definitely would have appreciated that, but just from the aspect of the story, that part didn't necessarily make sense to me. But getting back to what I was talking about earlier, eerie silence and environmental storytelling was everything in the first Prime games. And it felt like the quiet, lonely atmosphere, again, was not only a staple of the series, but it was absolutely essential in order to enjoy the quintessential Metroid Prime experience. And this game just wasn't like that. And again, I am a die-hard Metroid fan, always have been since I was a kid. I'm 36 years old now, and the first Metroid game I ever played was Metroid on the NES because my dad was also a gamer, so he owned the NES console before I was even born, and so I was kind of, born into it. And so again, it's part of just how I remember Metroid games to be. So I'm not trying to make a big deal out of something, and I'm not even trying to say it's an objectively bad thing. I'm just saying it's a very unique Metroid thing. And as you introduce more and more of the Federation and everybody gets more talkative, except Samus, I think you start to lose a little bit of that. Now, I gotta be honest. Much of my final thoughts and my closing thoughts about this game are probably going to be negative. And again, it's not because I think this game is just outright bad. I told you there was a lot of aspects of this game that I really, really loved, and I mean that. But I want to put it this way. Again, it had prime level expectations. The Lord of the Rings movies are my favorite movies of all time. If they made a fourth movie, to go along with the trilogy, we would have ridiculous expectations for that movie. And if then that fourth Lord of the Rings movie was to come out to be a decent movie, we are rightfully so going to act like it's absolutely terrible because it doesn't live up to the all-time great expectations of the first three movies. And I honestly think Metroid Prime is kind of the same thing. I think these two things can be true at once. Yes, it is a 79 out of 100 on Metacritic. But even though that is not necessarily a terrible score, that's enough for it to get a lot of backlash because people had 90s to 100 type expectations because it was a Metroid Prime game. And so I can score it like a 78, 79, and 80 and still be quite disappointed with the game. And that's personally how I felt. I do feel like one of the aspects that really suffered from this game is it just didn't seem as mature, sophisticated. Everything felt dumbed down. And here's something I want to bring up. One thing I don't see people asking is who the heck was in charge of naming everything in this game? Let me put it this way. When I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents did this thing where they let their children name all of the family pets. And it was easily the dumbest decision my parents have ever made. I love you, Mom and Dad, but it was pretty silly that they did that, and here's why. We had a white cat, and I named it Whitey, and I'm sure you can figure out why. We had a striped cat that I named Striper, and it had a baby kitten and we named that baby kitten Stripey. I feel like this 5-year-old version of myself was responsible for naming everything in Metroid Prime 4. It's called Viewros because it's got pretty views. The Lemorne because they're mourning. The Grievers because they're sad that they've fallen. Yeah, Phazon was cool in the earlier games, but in this one, we call this substance green energy because it's green and it has energy powers. Let's name the fireplace Flare Pool. Let's name the snowy place Ice Belt. And the mined area, the Great Mines. In Metroid Prime 3, Elysia was this beautiful planet with cities in the sky. In Greek mythology, Elysia is a heavenly realm that was the final resting place for the heroes upon their passing, which naturally makes it a fitting name for this Prime 3 location. Phendrana is a word that stems from its Greek roots, as phenology is the study of a climate's effect on nature, which naturally made Phendrana Drifts a beautiful title for the snowy Metroid Prime biome. But in Metroid Prime 4, we call this place Volt Forge, because it's an electricity place where you build things. It's just also lazy and uninspired. All the names and titles are dumbed down and adolescent. And maybe it seems like I'm nitpicking or making a huge deal about something that's very minor, but I kind of feel like the issues with the location names kind of sums up my biggest issues with the game as a whole. Not just the titles, but everything feels dumbed down and adolescent. The greatest soldiers in the galaxy are quippy and don't take themselves seriously. Many puzzle solutions are spoon-fed to the players with these incredibly talkative NPCs. The hint system will harass you with corrections if you try to go in the wrong direction for more than 3 seconds. Sylux is eternally mad at Samus because she screwed up his plan of stealing a big gun. And unlike the other Metroid games, it's basically impossible for me to ever get lost, because all of the level designs are so freaking straightforward. Speaking of which, this game felt painfully short for a Metroid Prime game. Now let me make this clear. Prime games usually are not that long by comparison, but even by the standards of the original trilogy, this game was insanely short. So I wanted to make sure I wasn't just making all this up and this wasn't all just fiction just going on in my head and it was just me. So I went back to Prime 1, Prime 2, Prime 3, and of course Prime 4, and I counted the amount of rooms in each game. Literally brought up the map and verified the amount of rooms. Now, you can find room counts for Prime 1, Prime 2, and Prime 3 on the internet. But I also went to my completed files of those games and verified that those numbers are correct. And maybe it's like a room or two is off, but for the most part, these are correct. So in Metroid Prime 1, there is a total, according to the map system, there is a total of 275 rooms. In Metroid Prime 2 Echoes, there is a total of 273 rooms between the Light World and the Dark World. In Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, that number drops a little bit to 248 rooms. And then, in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, there are 203 rooms, unless you include the rooms in the shrines, in which case those rooms get up to about 222. But I gotta say this, not only is that a significant drop-off, but to me, and based on my experience, it felt like even less rooms because everything is such a straight shot. In Prime 1 and Prime 2 especially, the maps felt like these complex labyrinths, like the biomes were legitimate mazes, which made the backtracking feel more involved and more adventurous. I enjoyed the aspect of trying to remember how to get places that I have already been. That's kind of just a part of the Metroid experience. But that aspect is non-existent in Metroid Prime 4. Everything is just so direct, which makes the backtracking and exploration, dare I say, feel boring and mundane. It was like a Metroid game without any of the Metroidvania. And listen, on my spoiler-free review, I did talk about how I enjoyed some of these worlds. I really enjoyed Volt Forge. I liked the way everything just felt condensed, the atmosphere was absolutely thrilling, the music was killer, and of course the gameplay just really helped with the experience. But it really started to wear on me as I got further and further into the game. Because like I said, this game is insanely linear, and a lot of people are countering with that, saying, well, Metroid Prime games, and just Metroid games in general, have always been linear. Yes, but there was still that webbing. There was still that maze aspect, that labyrinth aspect to it. There was a lot of different ways to diverge with your paths. And of course, you could explore a little bit, but you might have to eventually get, the ice missile to access this area, or you might have to get the power bomb to access this area. That is true, but you could still branch off from your paths, and then when you looked at the map, you kind of had to figure out how to retread your steps in order to get to areas you've already been, or to how to access new areas. But again, that is just not a part of Metroid Prime 4, and let me just sum it up this way. Look at these maps from Prime 1 and Prime 2. You're looking at some of the maps from, say, the Chozo Ruins, from the Phendrana Drifts. Just observe these maps and look at the different ways you can go, look at the different ways you can backtrack. Now I want you to look at the Flare Pool map from Metroid Prime 4. It is literally a straight shot the entire way with like a room that branches off every here and there for a save station or a little missile expansion, and then you're at the boss room. A completely straight shot. And what's funny is I didn't even really notice it the first time playing through Flare Pool. I more noticed the linearity with the Great Mines. And so I don't know why this aspect was lost. I mean, I know it's so crazy because we were waiting for this game for 18 years, and there was 8 years of development, but you have to remember that they scrapped all of the development process and then gave it back to Retro Studios. So really we're looking at, 5 years of development in reality? But even that, with that being the case, it still feels like this game was rushed. It wasn't just mapped out and wasn't as extensive. It felt like this game really suffered because it didn't have the complex Metroidvania aspects that we're generally used to as Metroid fans. And I didn't really talk about that a ton in my, first reviews, whether it be my non-spoiler or my spoiler review. But I'm now realizing a big reason why I didn't enjoy some of these maps was because just some of that backtracking, some of that maze aspect, some of that explorative feeling was lost in this game because it just felt too simplified. So again, are there parts of this game that I absolutely love? Yes, but all of those aspects that I loved in this game were definitely present, and present to almost a greater extent, maybe even a greater extent, with the exception of the graphics, in the first 3 Prime games. This just basically felt like a dumbed down, oversimplified version of those first 3 games. And I've mentioned this before. I believe, I'm not going to say objectively because you guys might disagree, but I feel passionately about this. Let me just put it that way. I've mentioned before that I believe the worst part of this game is the story. And maybe that's going to be very particular to the way I view it. Again, I have a channel that's all about Metroid lore, so obviously I'm going to care a lot about the way the universe is built, the story. A lot of people get through the Metroid Prime games, especially the first 2, not really having a great idea of what the hell's going on, unless you're really taking your time reading all the logs, reading all the lore. You might not have a great sense of, the real world building and the universe and the giant overarching story that's really going on. And so maybe this isn't going to be, as big of a complaint for a lot of people. But I had some serious issues with this story. And some people are trying to gaslight us into thinking that we're the dumb ones because really this is just a good story that's just as good as the original 3. No, this story's just horrible. And the worst part about it is these crazy Lemorn. They are just so unbelievably stupid. And they're basically impossible for me to sympathize with to any extent whatsoever. What happened to the Chozo and the Luminoth in Metroid Prime 1 and Metroid Prime 2 was a damn tragedy. They arrived at their paradise planet where they flourished, and then a freaking sentient planet sent out meteors and almost completely annihilated their species as a result, leaving death and destruction in its wake. But what happened to the Lemorn was a damn Darwin Award. So apparently, they have the psychic ability to distort space and time, yet they choose to live on planet Vuros with its incredibly harsh environment. And then, as a way to try to deal with the environment, they start brashly applying this green substance that they discovered in the pits of a volcano to their own people. Instead of taking just a few test subjects, giving them green energy samples, and seeing how they handle it over time, they decide to quickly sprinkle the substance over the entire planet's population, which results in them becoming fallen monstrosities. And then I, Samus, am their prophesied savior who's supposed to rescue them from their own historic fumble. This is basically the real-life equivalent of me getting an illness, and then I proceed to drink bleach to try to eliminate the germs. And then when my dumbass has to be rescued by the doctor, I'm constantly referring to him as my savior who I saw in visions ahead of time. I'm sorry, but as much as the devs want me to see the Lemorn as some wise higher beings, I just can't do it. They just look like complete idiots who signed up for their own easily avoidable apocalypse. Then there's the whole aspect of collecting the green crystals and trying to acquire enough so that you can ultimately get the memory fruit, which is a way of preserving the Lemorn's history, basically all of their information from the past, a way to, keep their legacy around, essentially. With that being said, a lot of people are thinking that this was the entire point of the game, that Samus was never asked to save the Lemorn per se. She was just asked to save and preserve their history with the memory fruit. And although that part of it, the memory fruit and preserving their legacy, that is objectively very, very clear. That is a part of the story. That is a part of Samus's mission. I don't actually think that was all that was expected of her. There's a couple reasons. For one, the entire Ice Belt section is showing the Lemorn trying to save their fallen versions of themselves that became Grievers. And for moments there, it looked like they were having some success. And so I don't think that narratively would have been a big part of the cutscenes, a big part of the story, if Samus doesn't ultimately like have some role to play in that. On top of that, we get to the end of the game where Samus is interacting with one of the holograms from the Lemorn, and the Lemorn says that, are you able to save us, essentially? Like, they were expressing their desire for Samus to be able to save them. I didn't interpret that as just a way of preserving their history, but literally saving them. And if it was just about preserving their history, then why did Samus look saddened and the NPC surrounding her respond to Samus's sadness? Why would Samus be sad in the first place? Because Samus was carrying the memory fruit at that time. She was about to, go back to, her timeline or, her another planet where she can ultimately plant this memory fruit. And so if she has it in her possession, why is she dipping her head like she just failed in that mission? It's because I think they genuinely wanted Samus to save them, to save the Grievers, and she couldn't do that. And so for me, this is just kind of like an unsatisfying ending to the game. Samus doesn't really save anyone. She just saves basically a history log of the Lemorn. And she doesn't end up, she doesn't defeat Sylux. She doesn't save the other Federation troopers. She saves her ass by getting out of there, but then she doesn't save the Lemorn. And, people will then try to make the excuse saying, well, we'll see what happens in Metroid Prime 5. Clearly, they're trying to build up to something. Bro, you could play that excuse forever. If we don't get a satisfying story or a satisfying ending in Metroid Prime 5, we could say, well, we'll see what we get in Metroid Prime 6. Metroid Prime 1, Metroid Prime 2, and Metroid Prime 3 didn't need that to tell good stories. Yes, there was a narrative that continued throughout the entirety of the trilogy, but they wrapped up the story in a satisfying way in Metroid Prime 1, where Talon was saved, the Great Poison was dealt with, Phazon was gone from the planet. Yeah, they tease us at the end showing that Dark Samus is still around, but Dark Samus ends up leaving Talon 4, so Talon 4 is no longer dealing with the destruction of that planet. It is now a healing planet. And that's the other thing. At the end of Metroid Prime 1, Metroid Prime 2, and Metroid Prime 3, there is a scene teasing what is next. You don't get that in Metroid Prime 4. This is the first game in this series to make no hint of what's to come next in the next game. So if we're to assume that Metroid Prime 5 is going to continue this story, that's just that. It's an assumption. It's not a given. So to expect the next installment to save this story, not only do I feel like that's lazy and giving Prime 4 too much of a pass, but I also just don't think that's an assumption you can make based on the fact that they didn't give us any indication that there's more to come. And again, it's so hard for me to understand why Samus would do this. I know I see other YouTubers trying to explain this story, trying to defend it. I cannot see Samus actively choosing to leave the Federation troopers behind who literally each played a role in saving her ass. I can't see her leaving them behind to die. She hasn't done anything like that throughout the history of Metroid games where she's just made some selfish decision like that. Like, yeah, it was about preserving the history of the Lemorn. Okay, but is keeping some level of documented history of this extinct race more important than her living Federation troopers who are dealing with Sylux in that given moment, who has already displayed his ability to use his psychic energies to distort space and time? She's just gonna leave that behind? I don't see how her mission with the memory fruit is more important than that. And that's why so many of us died just waiting and thinking, nah, I'm not meant to leave here, because it wouldn't be the heroic thing to do. Okay, but let's have some real talk here. Although Metroid Prime 4 was a major disappointment to me in those specific aspects, I still actually have hope for Metroid Prime 5. And there's a few reasons for that. I know that probably that sounds crazy to even hear after how negative I've been, but I see people saying, this is a horrible Metroid Prime game, just shelve it, cancel it, I don't want to see another, but that's ridiculous. We got one game that was still pretty good in many ways, but in a lot of ways, it didn't live up to the original trilogy. But in the grand scheme of things, it was still just one disappointing game. It could still be a pretty good game, but still disappointing compared to the Metroid Prime trilogy. And I don't care what anyone says. Nintendo might not come right out and say it, but they listen to the complaints of their players, and they have demonstrated this over and over again throughout their history of making games. If you're a Zelda fan, you should know this. What happened when we got complaints about Skyward Sword and the game being way too linear and the formula being old and the same old dungeons over and over again? They completely changed everything by giving us Breath of the Wild and doing the complete opposite by just blowing the world open with, open world dynamics. And then after Breath of the Wild, people had some complaints about that. So they tried to return to a little bit more of that, dungeon format. They even called it the Fire Temple and the Water Temple and just repeated some of those names from Ocarina of Time. And it's the same thing with Twilight Princess and Wind Waker and the way those games just went back and forth in the extremes because they were responding to negativity from the fans. And the same thing is the case with Metroid games. For example, why didn't Samus talk in Metroid Prime 4 Beyond? It's because of how we responded to her talking so much in Metroid Other M. That they didn't want to even risk her saying a word in this game. It was like they were terrified to let her have any sort of dialogue with the NPC characters whatsoever, that it made the whole thing just feel weird. So, for better or for worse, Nintendo does listen to the complaints of their players. And the fact that so many of us are saying that we want a return to that isolating feeling, we want a return to that, eerie, lonely Metroid with more of the Metroidvania, I think we might actually get that in Metroid Prime 5. I'll eat crow if we don't end up getting it. But again, they've showed us time and time again that if there's enough backlash, they will listen. It's even happened with a recent Mario Kart game where a bunch of people were upset because they were forced to play, the big intermission tracks, and then they made updates to the game. People were still upset. Then they made updates to the odds again, and now we're getting to a point where people are more happy with the game. People act like Nintendo doesn't listen to their fans. I think they do. They just don't outright acknowledge it. Whether it's because they're too prideful, they just kind of keep things close to the chest. It just is what it is. Now, although I was a little bit disappointed with this game, and like I said, I still have hope for the sequel, I'm not really surprised that this game didn't meet my expectations. One, because my expectations were so astronomically high, because I believe the Metroid Prime trilogy is in the argument for the greatest video game trilogy of all time. For me, it's right there alongside of the Halo trilogy. The other reason why I wasn't all that surprised is because there was 18 years between the release of Metroid Prime 3 and Metroid Prime 4. And that is a long, long time. How many times have we got 3 games, so a game and 2 sequels within the span of 5-6 years. And then we get the 4th game 18 years later. This is unprecedented territory. And because of that, maybe it was ridiculous for me to even expect Metroid Prime trilogy level of greatness from the jump. A lot of the team that made those games the beautiful gems that they are, they're just not around anymore. There are a lot of, they have some of the same members of Retro Studios, but a lot of them are different. If you watch the Kiwi Talks channel on YouTube, and it is a wonderful, wonderful channel, you'll see him interview a lot of former Retro Studios developers. And I do say former Retro Studios developers. And they're talking about the roles they had in creating that amazing trilogy. Like I said, these are former members of the Retro team, yet they were geniuses in their field. They were not a part of Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. And so some of those aspects, like the signature Metroid level design, it might suffer with their absence. Some of those guys understood the value of isolation and quiet in the series. and maybe even the devs who wrote the lore are no longer involved. I would basically guarantee it. Like, whoever wrote the lore seems like of the original trilogy, it seems like they had nothing to do with the lore for this one, because it was just lacking so much. And like I said, the titles, the names, the world building, it just didn't seem like it was on the same level. I see a lot of people complaining about various things. For me, the story, the writing, those are the biggest things for me, because that just meant so much to me. The desert, I saw some people misunderstanding how I felt about the desert. I really don't like it. It didn't feel like it belonged in a Metroid game. It felt like a big hub for a Zelda game, which was a little bit weird, because although I do love Zelda, clearly, and I do love Metroid, clearly, I have a channel that's about both of those things, I also want them to stay separate. Metroid is not Zelda, and Zelda is not Metroid, but it felt like a big hub for a Zelda game. So I'd rather not have the desert. With that being said, I did like the bike. But when I enjoyed the bike the most is when I was doing the training sessions in Volt Forge. It was when I was driving around Volt Forge in the motorcycle with that very badass music. That's when I had the most fun. But once it got out to the desert, it was a little bit more just stale and felt a lot more like a Zelda game. I gotta admit, it didn't feel like the Metroid Prime 4 that I had envisioned. It didn't feel like the Metroid Prime 4 that I had dreamt of. So again, I'm not just saying this to protect my ass and try to protect my Metroid channel, but I genuinely mean this. There are games that I love that it seems like the video game community hates. Like Skyward Sword. A lot of people didn't like Skyward Sword. They thought it was a terrible Zelda game. They thought it was, the black sheep of the franchise. And I freaking love it. So if you love this game, if you love Metroid Prime 4 Beyond, I'm cool with you, okay? I think you're wrong. I think you're very, very wrong. But I'm still cool with you. I would state my case and I would hear out yours. But this game just didn't meet my expectations. And like I said before, if it had just been called Metroid Beyond, I don't think I would have had the same level of expectations. I don't think I would have had such a good idea of what this game was going to be based on the first 3 games that I played. You know what I'm saying? And so that was a big part of my disappointment. But these were my final thoughts on this game. I really just wanted to get this off my chest and really just clear the air. And now, with that being said, I kind of feel like I'm done just speaking on this game as far as how I feel about it. Now I want to start picking things back up with lore and facts videos and that real stuff that I'm passionate about with these games. But I don't want to just turn this into ranting about Metroid Prime 4. I've got it out there. I've got my thoughts on there. I want to hear your guys' thoughts in the comment section. But after that, I don't feel like there's a lot more to be said on this. It's already been said. And so, please, bring me Metroid 6, okay? Mercury Steam, I hope you guys are working on Metroid 6, and I really want it, because there is some ways where I need to cleanse my palate after Metroid Prime 4 Beyond. Again, not a terrible game, but it just didn't live up to what I wanted it to be, and maybe that's my fault. Maybe I shouldn't have set my expectations so high. So what did you guys think? Did it meet your expectations? Did the NPC characters annoy you? And genuinely, if they didn't, can you please let me know in the comment section, did you play the first Metroid Prime 3 games? Because that part I'm genuinely curious about for people who say that it didn't ruin the experience for them. Thanks for watching as always. I appreciate all of you guys. Make sure to like and subscribe for more Metroid and Zelda content, and I will see you guys in the next video.